The first spear missed his throat by the width of a breath, close enough that the air it cut brushed his skin like a warning whisper, and the second would have pinned his heart to the red stone behind him if he hadn't twisted, boots skidding on dust that tasted of iron and old blood, while the third shattered against the scarred metal of his forearm guard and exploded into splinters that glittered briefly in the sun. In that frozen instant, spears still flying, warriors shouting in a language he didn't know, the entire village roaring awake around him. Cade Arlen realized that getting lost on Vorith Prime had been the most dangerous mistake of his life, and maybe the most important one too. He hadn't meant to enter the village. He hadn't even known it was there until the canyon narrowed and opened suddenly into a bowl of stone and bone. Huts carved directly from the rock like tumors grown rather than built. Banners made of cured hides snapping in a hot, metallic wind. His ship, what was left of it, burned somewhere beyond the ridge, a smoking scar in the desert, and his Enevikor was dead. No signals, no maps, just survival instinct and the faint hope that sentient life might be merciful. Vorith Prime was not known for mercy. The warriors came at him without hesitation. 12 of them, maybe more, their bodies tall and corded, skin marked with ritual scars that caught the light, eyes pale and unblinking beneath bone-crested helms. Their spears were grown, not forged, organic shafts hardened to the strength of steel, tips shimmering with toxin that hummed softly as it vibrated in the air. They moved like a single organism, a hunting pack executing a kill they'd practiced since childhood. Cade moved because he had to. Training took over where fear tried to bloom. He dropped, rolled, felt a spear scrape sparks from his shoulder plate, came up inside their formation before they could adjust. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. His body remembered 100 battlefields, remembered how to read the smallest shift of weight, the tightening of a grip before a thrust. He caught one spear mid-lunge, snapped it against his knee, and used the broken shaft to vault over a sweeping strike that would have taken his legs. Dust rose around him in choking clouds, the air filled with the sharp scent of venom and the guttural shouts of the Verity warriors. From the edge of the village, someone watched. She stood on a raised stone platform near the largest structure, something between a hall and a shrine, her posture rigid, hands clenched at her sides. She had been in the middle of a rite when the alarm horn sounded, her focus broken, her blood still humming with the echo of ancient words. Now her attention was locked on the stranger in the killing circle below, the off-worlder who moved like water poured through fire. He was human. She could tell by the lines of his face, the way his eyes tracked threats with predatory calm. But not like the traitors or envoys she'd seen pass through Verathon Prime under heavy guard. This one was alone, lost, and instead of begging or dying, he was smiling. It wasn't a wide smile. It didn't bare teeth in challenge like her people did. It was small, almost private, curved at one corner of his mouth as if the chaos around him amused him, as if this was a game he knew how to win. "Enough," she said, though her voice was swallowed by the clash of bodies and the crack of splintering spears. She tried again, louder, sharper, the authority of her blood carried in the syllables. "Enough." The warriors hesitated. Just for a heartbeat. It was enough. Cade used that heartbeat. He disarmed another attacker, spun, and sent the man crashing into 2 others with a brutal efficiency that left them gasping in the dirt. He straightened slowly, hands empty, chest rising and falling as he took in the ring of weapons still pointed at him. He lifted his gaze to the platform, to the woman who had spoken. Their eyes met. Something shifted. He felt it as surely as he'd felt the spears cutting the air. A pull, sudden and inexplicable, like gravity adjusting its rules. She was taller than most human women, her frame strong beneath the layered ceremonial armor she wore, skin a deep umber etched with luminous markings that glowed faintly along her collarbone and arms. Her hair was bound in thick braids woven with metal and bone, and her eyes, those eyes, were a molten amber that seemed to see too much, to weigh him and find him wanting and interesting all at once. "Lower your weapons," she commanded, and this time they obeyed. A low murmur rippled through the gathered Refthi as the circle opened slightly, tension coiling like a living thing. Cade raised his hands slowly, palms out, a universal gesture that had saved his life more times than he could count. He forced himself to breathe, to let the adrenaline bleed away just enough to think. "My turn," he said, voice rough but steady, and the corner of his mouth lifted again. "I'd really rather not hurt anyone else." The words meant nothing to them, but the tone did. She descended from the platform with measured steps, each one deliberate, the stone seeming to soften beneath her feet. When she reached him, she stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough that he could see the faint scars at the edge of her jaw, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. He realized then that she was younger than he'd first thought, though her presence carried the weight of someone who had been making hard decisions for a long time. "I am Sira of the Ashen Line," she said in trade tongue, her accent clipped but clear. "You stand in a warrior village. Explain why you are not dead." Cade barked a short laugh before he could stop himself. "I ask myself that a lot," he said, then sobered. "Name's Cade. I didn't come here to fight. My ship went down. I was looking for water, and maybe directions." Her gaze flicked briefly to the horizon, to the faint plume of smoke rising beyond the canyon. Crash, then. That explained much. Off-worlders did not wander into Refthi territory by choice. Most who did never made it this far. "You fought our hunters," she said, not accusing, simply stating fact. "They shot first," he replied mildly. A ripple of amusement touched her expression, quick and gone. "They always do." She studied him in silence, and in that silence Cade became acutely aware of how exposed he was. Armor scored and cracked from re-entry, supplies gone, weapons lost with the ship. He was standing in the heart of a culture that measured worth in blood and survival, and somehow, inexplicably, the person with the power to decide his fate was a woman whose eyes made his pulse stumble. "You will come with me," Sira said at last. "If you are lying, you will die. If you are telling the truth," she paused, head tilting slightly, "then your survival will depend on how useful you are." "Fair terms," Cade said. "I'm very useful." She snorted, the sound sharp and surprised, and turned away without another word. The warriors closed in around him, not with spears raised but with a wary escort that told him he was not free. As they moved through the village, Cade took in the details with a soldier's eye, the way the huts were positioned for defense, the children watching from shadowed doorways, the elders whose gazes lingered on him with something like curiosity rather than hatred. This was not a simple place. It was old. It had endured. They brought him into the great hall, a cavernous space carved from the heart of the rock, lit by bioluminescent veins that pulsed softly in the walls. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of smoke and resin. At the center burned a low fire, its flames an unnatural blue. Sira dismissed the guards with a gesture and faced him across the fire. Up close, the pull he'd felt earlier intensified, a low hum under his skin that made no sense and demanded no permission. He pushed it aside. Survival first. Everything else later. "You will tell me everything," she said. "From the moment you entered our sky." Cade nodded and began. He told her about the contract gone wrong, the ambush in orbit, the damage he couldn't outrun. He told her about ejecting the NAV core to save the engine, about riding a half-dead ship through atmosphere and praying to gods he didn't believe in. He did not tell her everything, old habits died hard, but he told her enough. When he finished, the fire crackled softly between them. "You are a warrior," Sierra said, not a question. I was, Cade replied. Now I'm retired. Her eyes searched his face. War does not retire from us. He met her gaze. No, it doesn't. Something passed between them then. Recognition, perhaps, of shared scars that went deeper than skin. Sierra straightened, decision settling over her features like armor. You will stay, she said. For now. The desert will kill you faster than we will, and I will not have your death on my hands without cause. Cade exhaled slowly. I appreciate the hospitality. Do not mistake this for kindness, she warned. He smiled again, softer this time. I wouldn't dare. As the firelight flickered and the village settled into uneasy quiet around them. Neither of them noticed the way the markings on Sierra's skin glowed just a little brighter, nor the way the ancient stone beneath their feet seemed to listen, as if something old and vast had stirred at the sound of his name. Somewhere beyond the stars, forces already in motion adjusted their course, and the universe, which had brought them together with spears and blood, leaned closer to see what would happen next. The night on Vorath Prime did not fall so much as it descended, heavy and deliberate, the sky bruising from copper to deep indigo as twin moons rose like watchful eyes over the warrior village, and Cade lay awake on a slab of stone that passed for a guest's bed, listening to a world that refused to let him forget where he was. Wind howled through the canyons like a living thing, carrying distant roars from creatures he had no desire to meet, while closer sounds, low voices, the scrape of metal, the rhythmic crack of training staves, spoke of a people who did not truly rest even when darkness came. He should have been exhausted. His body ached in the familiar way that followed combat, muscles humming with spent adrenaline, bruises blooming beneath armor. But his mind refused to settle, circling again and again around molten amber eyes and a voice that carried command without cruelty. When dawn came, it arrived sharp and bright, light spilling over the canyon rim and igniting the village in gold and rust. Cade was already on his feet when the guards returned, this time with weapons slung low, posture less hostile than before. They led him back to the great hall, where Sierra waited alone, her ceremonial armor replaced by something simpler, leather and woven metal that allowed freer movement, though the symbols of her line still marked her skin in faintly glowing patterns. In the clearer light, he could see exhaustion etched at the edges of her expression, a tightness around her eyes that spoke of long nights and heavy responsibility. You will eat, she said without preamble, gesturing to a low table where bowls of steaming stew waited. Then you will train. Cade blinked. Train. If you remain here, you will not be weak, she said flatly. And my people will not respect you if you are coddled. A slow grin spread across his face. I like your hospitality better every minute. She ignored the comment, but there was that flicker again, the almost smile she didn't quite allow herself. As they ate, he learned the rhythm of the village through observation, the way warriors greeted one another with forearm clasps, the way children were included in daily tasks without ceremony, the way elders were deferred to with subtle shifts of posture rather than overt bows. This was a culture built on strength, yes, but also on continuity, on survival as a communal act. Training took place in the open ring where he'd first fought, the ground packed hard by generations of feet. Sierra watched from the edge as he sparred with two of her hunters, their movements cautious at first, then increasingly aggressive as they realized he was not to be underestimated. Cade adapted, adjusting to their longer reach, their different center of gravity, the slight delay between intent and motion caused by their bone-crested helms. He took hits. He gave them back. Sweat burned his eyes, dust coated his tongue, and somewhere in the middle of it all, laughter bubbled up from his chest, raw and unguarded. When the bout ended, Sierra stepped into the ring. The hunters retreated without argument, eyes gleaming with anticipation. You fight like you have nothing to lose, she said. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. That's one way to put it. Fight me, she said. The ring went silent. Cade hesitated. Everything in him screamed that this was a bad idea. She was clearly more than a ceremonial leader. The way she moved, the way the others watched her, told him she was lethal. And yet, there was no malice in her eyes, only challenge. If I hurt you, he began. You won't, she replied, already shedding her outer layers. And if you do, I will return the favor. They circled each other, the air between them charged. Cade felt it again, that strange pull, stronger now, threading through his awareness like a second heartbeat. When she lunged, it was with breathtaking speed, her strike aimed at his throat. He parried instinctively, their forearms colliding with a jolt that sent heat racing up his arm. She flowed into the next move seamlessly, spinning low, forcing him to jump, then driving an elbow toward his ribs that he barely deflected in time. She was magnificent. There was no other word for it. Every movement was precise, economical, honed by years of practice and necessity. Fighting her felt like dancing on the edge of a blade, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. He pushed himself harder than he had in years, matching her pace, surprising her once or twice with techniques she hadn't seen before. When she finally caught him, hooked his leg and sent him sprawling into the dust, he laughed again, breathless and unrepentant. Your turn, she said, offering a hand. He took it. The contact sent a shock through him, sharp and intimate. Her grip was strong, warm. For a heartbeat too long, neither of them let go. The days that followed blurred into a strange, almost domestic rhythm. Cade helped repair structures damaged by storms, his off-world tools earning curious stares and grudging admiration. He joined hunts beyond the canyon, learning the signs of Veritran predators, the unspoken rules of movement through hostile terrain. At night, he shared meals in the Great Hall, listening more than he spoke, absorbing stories told in low voices around the blue fire. Sierra was often there, sometimes silent, sometimes engaging him with questions that cut closer to his past. Then he was comfortable with. You left your people? She said one night, as the fire burned low and most had drifted away. Why? He stared into the flames. Images flickered there unbidden. Faces he'd failed to save, orders he'd followed that still tasted bitter. Because staying would have killed me, he said quietly. She nodded once, as if that answer made perfect sense. I did not choose to lead, she said after a moment. But if I leave, my people will die. The honesty of it struck him harder than any blow. That's a heavy burden. It is, she agreed. But it is mine. Their conversations grew easier after that. They spoke of small things, of the differences between their worlds, of food and stars and the strange humor found in shared hardship. The pull between them deepened, subtle and undeniable, manifesting in lingering glances, in the way their shoulders brushed a fraction too often, in the heat that flared whenever their hands touched. Cade tried to keep his distance. He'd learned long ago that attachments were liabilities. But the walls he'd built were eroding stone by stone. One evening, as they stood on the canyon rim watching the moon's rise, Sierra broke the silence. There is something you should know, she said. Our world is changing. The storms grow worse. The beasts migrate closer each season. And there are other threats. He turned to her. What kind of threats? Off-world, she said, the word heavy. Those who see Verathon Prime as a resource, not a home. Cade's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of threat intimately. If they come here, he said slowly, your people won't stand a chance alone. Her gaze searched his face. And you? He met her eyes. I don't walk away from fights like that. Something like relief softened her features. quickly masked. Then perhaps the universe did not bring you here by accident. He almost said something then, something reckless and honest, but held it back. The night air was cool, the stars sharp and distant. He could feel the shape of something forming between them, fragile and powerful, and he was terrified of what it would cost. Far beyond the canyon, beyond the wreckage of his ship and the storms that scoured the desert, a signal pulsed weakly into the void, an automated distress ping he hadn't known survived the crash. It drifted outward, silent and patient, waiting for the wrong ears to hear it, as Cade and Sierra stood together under alien moons, unaware that the bond growing between them was about to be tested by forces far larger than either of them could imagine. The first sign that everything was about to fracture came not with fire from the sky or the roar of engines, but with silence, an unnatural, suffocating stillness that settled over the canyon at dawn, muting the wind and driving the birds from the air as if the world itself were holding its breath. Cade felt it before anyone spoke. A prickle along his spine honed by too many ambushes survived by instinct alone. He was sharpening a hunting blade when the hair on his arms rose, his hand pausing mid-motion, every muscle in his body tightening as if bracing for impact. Across the village, Sierra had stopped as well. She stood at the edge of the training ring, eyes lifted to the pale sky, her expression gone hard and distant in a way he'd come to recognize as dangerous focus. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the open space, and in that look was an unspoken understanding. Something was wrong. The alarm horns sounded seconds later, deep and resonant, their voices echoing off the canyon walls like a warning from the bones of the world. Warriors poured from the huts in disciplined waves, weapons already in hand, faces set with grim familiarity. Sierra moved instantly, command snapping into place around her like a second skin as she issued orders in sharp, flowing syllables. Cade didn't wait to be told what to do. He grabbed his gear and fell into step beside her, his pulse hammering not with fear, but with the cold clarity of someone who had been here before. They reached the ridge overlooking the desert just as the sky split open. Ships tore through the upper atmosphere in streaks of white-hot fire, their hulls gleaming with polished alloy that caught the sun like blades. They were not traders, not explorers. Cade recognized the silhouettes instantly. Long, angular cruisers bristling with weapon arrays, corporate insignia etched into their flanks. Salvage consortium. Raiders with legal paperwork and no conscience. The kind of people who answered distress pings with guns and contracts. His blood went cold. "They followed my signal," he said hoarsely. Sierra's head snapped toward him. "You're what?" "I didn't know it was still transmitting," he said, already hating himself. "I swear. I would have shut it down if I had." Her jaw tightened, fury and fear warring in her eyes. "You brought them here." The words hit harder than any accusation he'd ever faced, because they were true. He saw it all then, the chain of cause and effect stretching back to the moment his ship went down, every choice leading inexorably to this. His presence here had never been neutral. It had been a ticking clock. The first shots struck the far side of the canyon, explosions ripping into stone and sending plumes of dust and debris skyward. Screams rose from the village below as people scattered, the carefully ordered life they'd built thrown instantly into chaos. Cade didn't wait for permission. He turned and ran. He fought like a man possessed. He fought like someone trying to outrun his own guilt. Side by side with the Verity warriors, he repelled landing parties that poured from dropships in waves, their armor gleaming, their weapons spitting death. Cade moved through them with brutal efficiency, using terrain and momentum, barking warnings in a language half the warriors didn't understand but somehow obeyed anyway. He saved lives, pulled a child from the path of falling debris, dragged a wounded hunter to safety under covering fire, But for every victory, another ship screamed overhead. Another explosion shook the ground. At the heart of it all, Circe was incandescent. She fought with a ferocity that bordered on the mythic, her luminous markings flaring bright as she cut through enemies with fluid, devastating grace. Cade caught glimpses of her between blasts of smoke and flame, each one tightening something in his chest. This was her world burning, and he was the spark. They regrouped briefly in the Great Hall, now a makeshift command center filled with wounded and the echo of distant bombardment. Circe turned on him there, the chaos momentarily held at bay by the weight of her authority. "You should leave," she said, voice low and shaking with barely contained emotion. "Take a ship if you can. This is not your fight anymore." He stared at her, stunned. "I'm not running. You already brought death to my door," she shot back. "Do not add your body to the pile." The words cut deep, but beneath them he heard something else. Fear. Not for her people. For him. "I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the roar of battle fading into a distant hum. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the weakness. What she found instead made her breath hitch. "Then you are a fool," she said, and turned away before he could see what it cost her to say it. The battle turned when the consortium deployed walkers, towering machines that strode over the canyon floor, their cannons carving trenches through stone and flesh alike. The Refthi fought valiantly, but this was not a war they were equipped to win. Cade knew it. Circe knew it. Every passing minute made it more brutally clear. There was only one option left. The ancient structure beneath the Great Hall was not just stone. Cade discovered that when Circe finally took him deep into the heart of it, past sealed doors and glowing glyphs that responded to her presence like a living thing. Beneath the village lay something old, an engine or a weapon or both, built by a civilization long gone and bound to the ashen line by blood and oath. "It will stop them," she said, standing before the core as it pulsed with contained power. "But it requires a conduit. A living one." Cade understood immediately. "It'll kill you." "Yes," she said simply. "No," he snapped, stepping forward. "There has to be another way." "There is not," she replied, meeting his gaze with heartbreaking calm. "This is why my line exists, why we endure. To stand here when the end comes." Emotion surged up, hot and desperate. "You said you didn't choose to lead," he said. "Don't tell me you choose to die." She reached for him then, cupping his face in her hands, her touch burning, grounding. "I choose my people," she whispered, "and I choose you to live." He covered her hands with his own, forehead resting against hers. "I'm tired of surviving," he said. "If someone's paying the price, it's not you." Before she could stop him, he turned and stepped into the light. Pain unlike anything he'd ever known tore through him as the core activated, energy flooding his nervous system, rewriting him on a molecular level. He screamed once, then clenched his teeth, holding on to the image of Circe's face, to the feel of her hands, to the promise he'd never let himself make. The engine roared to life, power surging upward and outward in a wave that shattered the walkers, disabled the ships, and turned the tide of battle in a single, cataclysmic instant. When it was over, the desert was silent once more. Cade collapsed at the base of the core, smoke rising from his armor, every nerve ending aflame. He dimly registered Circe kneeling beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed them to his chest, luminous markings flickering erratically as if searching for resonance. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her composure finally breaking. "You arrogant, reckless, stay." He forced his eyes open, vision swimming. "Told you," he rasped. "Very useful." A sob tore free from her, half laughter, half grief, as she pulled him into her arms, holding him as if she could anchor him to the world by sheer force of will. Above them, the broken remains of the consortium fleet burned in the sky, falling stars marking the end of one threat, and the beginning of consequences neither of them yet understood. When Cade woke, the first thing he felt was warmth. Steady, grounding, wrapped around him like an anchor in a storm, and the second was pain, deep and pervasive but no longer consuming, a distant echo rather than a screaming command, and for a terrifying half-second, he thought he'd died, and this was some elaborate, merciful illusion, until he opened his eyes and saw Sierra leaning over him. Her face slack with exhaustion, eyes ringed dark, one hand clutching his like she'd been afraid to let go even for a breath. The great hall was quiet now, the blue fire reduced to embers, the air heavy with smoke and the metallic tang of spent energy. But beneath it all was life, soft murmurs, the shuffle of feet, the fragile sound of a people still standing. When she realized he was awake, her breath hitched, a sharp, broken sound she didn't bother to hide, and she pressed her forehead to his, luminous markings flaring gently, as if in response to his presence, to his survival. "You should be dead," she whispered, voice trembling with something dangerously close to relief. He managed a crooked smile. "I get that a lot." The laugh that escaped her was wet and disbelieving, and she didn't pull away, not even when her composure cracked completely and she clutched him tighter, as though afraid the universe might change its mind if she loosened her grip. He became aware then of the changes inside himself. Not just the residual ache, but a hum beneath his skin, a low resonance that seemed to answer the ancient engine still slumbering beneath the stone, and he understood that he had not escaped the cost, only transformed it. The elders came later, their faces grave, their voices reverent as they spoke of what he had done, of how the core had accepted him not as a sacrifice but as something else entirely, a living bridge between what was lost and what remained, and Cade listened in silence. His fingers threaded through Sierra's, because titles and legends meant very little compared to the simple fact that she was here and breathing and alive. Recovery was slow, measured in days that bled into weeks, during which the village rebuilt itself around them, scars visible but spirits unbroken, and during that time Cade learned what it meant to stay. Not as a weapon, not as a passing survivor, but as someone woven into the fragile, stubborn fabric of a place. Sierra visited him every day, sometimes to argue, sometimes to sit in companionable silence, sometimes to rest her head against his shoulder and let the weight she carried slip just enough to remind him she was still mortal. The pull between them, once subtle, now burned openly, no longer something to be denied or tiptoed around, and when he finally stood again under his own power, it was with her hands steadying him, her eyes shining with pride she didn't bother to conceal. They spoke, finally, of the future, of the consortium ships that would not return, of the attention that victory always drew, of the truth that Harith Prime would never again be hidden from the wider galaxy. And the conversation was hard and honest and threaded with fear, but also with resolve. "I will not ask you to stay," Sierra said one night as they stood beneath the moons, the canyon quiet and watchful. "And I will not ask you to leave." Cade turned to her, feeling the hum inside him resonate with the ancient stone, with her presence, with the impossible road that had brought them here. "I'm done running," he said, "and I'm done pretending I don't care." The kiss, when it came, was not explosive or desperate, but slow and certain, a promise forged in shared fire and survival, and the universe seemed to exhale around them, as if acknowledging a choice long in the making. In the days that followed, word spread beyond the canyon, of the off-worlder who had become a shield, of the leader who had chosen connection over isolation, and though threats still loomed in the dark between stars, so too did something rarer and more dangerous: hope. Cade stood at Sierra's side as the village gathered, warriors and children and elders alike, feeling the weight of what he had become and the quiet certainty of what he was choosing to be. And as the twin moons rose once more over Harith Prime, Their light caught on two figures standing together against the vastness, not untouched by war, not free of consequence, but bound by a love forged in blood and starlight, ready to face whatever came next. Together,